those affected by mitochondrial disorders, UMDF is here for you. Since 1996, we've worked to provide support, fund research, and create awareness.
Our mission is to promote research for cures and treatments of these diseases and to give support to affected families.
We want future generations to grow up in a world without mitochondrial disease.
I'm playing for the United Mitochondrial Disease Foundation.
Look at that. Nice check for you.
Over the years, our community has grown and our message has sparked a movement.
Hey everybody, it's Maya Mialik. Have you ever heard of mitochondrial disease?
Together, we've been able to make a difference for patient families around the world. Today, we are helping thousands of people navigate their mitochondrial disease journey. We're here, listening and providing support. We're here, educating and connecting patients and healthcare providers. We're here, finding and funding the best cutting-edge research. We will not rest until we find a cure. Join the movement at umdf.org.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us. Our topic for this webcast is keeping the mitochondria healthy for the body and mind. And joining us for this webcast are Dr. Mark Tarnopolsky and Aaron Hatcher. They are both from the Neuromuscular and Neurometabolic Clinic at McMaster University Medical Center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Before we hear from our panel, some housekeeping items for you. We have muted all of the lines so that if during this webcast you have a question, we ask that you use the Q&A button to type in your question so that we can direct them to our panelists. Also, we ask that you keep your questions focused on the topic of this webcast. Ask the Mito Doc webcasts are made possible through the generous support of these sponsors. So we ask that you join us in thanking them for their support of these very important programs. And we also want to use this opportunity to tell you about some great things happening at UMDF for the benefit of our patient community. If you haven't taken a look at our new website, please visit umdf.org soon. All of the information that our patient families and our scientific and medical community need has now been updated and with easier navigation. The information's easy to find, so we really ask you to visit umdf.org and take a look. Also, we've launched Mito U. Now, this is a great resource for patient families in our scientific and medical community, and it provides you with helpful information on diagnosis and treatments, and we will continually update this with informational videos for your viewing, including the archive of these Ask the Mito Doc webcasts, so you can play them back at any time when you have a moment or two. Now, this month, we're going to launch our Give Energy Holiday Appeal campaign, and you'll be hearing more about this in the coming weeks ahead. But for now, if you know of a business that would like to participate as a corporate sponsor in our light bulb campaign, please reach out to Tanya Hanscom in our special events department. Her contact information is right there on the screen for you, and you can give her a call or send her an email and participate. Also, 2021 is UMDF's silver anniversary. Mitochondrial Medicine 2021 will begin June 23rd in Charlotte, North Carolina. Now, registration is expected to open soon, and we are all hopeful that we will be able to see you in person next year. Looking ahead to next month, our topic for Ask the Mito Doc will be diet and nutrition, managing mitochondrial disease through the holidays. Joining us will be Dr. Barbara Marriage, and Dr. Marriage is a global science lead with a pediatric specialty in nutrition and science and medical affairs at Abbott Nutrition in Columbus, Ohio. We look forward to welcoming Dr. Marriage back to our Ask the Mito Doc panel for this presentation, which will happen on December the 8th. For now, let's get started with this presentation, and I am pleased to introduce you to Dr. Mark Tarnopolsky and Aaron Hatcher. And Dr. Tarnopolsky is going to begin the presentation for this Ask the Mito Doc webcast.
Okay, well, thanks very much for the introduction. I'm just going to go on to share my screen. Good. All right, so I'll be talking about exercise and mitochondrial disease, and I'll start off first, followed by my long-term colleague, Aaron Hatcher, who's going to provide us with some practical application of how to exercise. Certainly, the number one thing I've seen over the last 6 months with COVID-19 is with people pretty much stuck in their home, people have really decreased their physical activity. and increase their energy consumption. Some people call it the COVID-19 pounds that you gained by being stuck at home. Now, certainly exercise and diet are helpful to keep your fitness up and to keep your weight well maintained. And we won't spend much time talking about nutrition because I know Barbara Marriage is going to be talking more about that and how to maintain your proper nutrition over the holidays. Because again, another big period when people tend to gain weight is over the holiday period. So we're going to focus on the exercise aspect of things. So in our clinic and in our laboratory, we do a number of studies in young healthy people looking at how various strategies can improve muscle hypertrophy. So we look at different types of exercise and how drugs and nutrition can enhance muscle hypertrophy. And in addition, we do a number of studies in younger adults looking at the mitochondrial biogenesis. How can exercise increase the growth of new mitochondria? And the nice thing about studying younger people is that we can do multiple muscle biopsies, we can do AV catheters, and a variety of different things where we can get a good idea of the molecular mechanism and from that derive a better understanding as to how we can apply this to patients. Because if we look at the two main patient groups that we see, one are, and what the topic today is, mitochondrial disease, and even in patients who have diseases that you wouldn't think are mitochondrial in nature, things like obesity, type 2 diabetes, leg immobilization, all of those lead to a secondary mitochondrial dysfunction. So anything that improves mitochondrial health is applicable to those individuals as it is to patients with mitochondrial disease. So we call those other disorders secondary. And of course, today we're focusing on the primary mitochondrial disorders. And that is those disorders that have a genetic basis where the mitochondria is directly affected. Patients have muscle atrophy with muscular dystrophy, different neuropathies, and many of our patients with mitochondrial disease who can have either myopathy and or neuropathy get muscle atrophy. So this really is the opposite, the antithesis of hypertrophy. So taking what we know in young healthy individuals and applying it to patients is something that we've been doing for the last 26 years in the laboratory and clinic. And Aaron's been with me pretty much the whole time, helping us to coordinate our clinical trials. Now we know that exercise is helpful. On the left here, this is a graph showing that people across all different weight ranges, from normal weight to overweight and obese, and even more severe obesity. What this refers to is those who meet physical guidelines and those who are inactive. And it shows that if you're very inactive, you lose about 4.5 to 5 years on your lifespan. And it's been repeatedly shown that regular physical activity, in the reciprocal way of thinking about it, gives you 4.5 to 5 years extra lifespan extension. And across the board, we can see that it doesn't matter what weight you are, physical activity or inactivity increases your risk of death, and being physically active lowers that risk. And the reason for this is that exercise releases a number of factors, which we call exerkines or myokines, which travel to various tissues throughout the body and confer benefit. And what's interesting is we now know that with regular physical activity, there's a lower risk of cancer, lower risk of non-stroke neurological disorders, as well as the classic things like heart disease, fatty liver disease, and diabetes. So if we look here, this is another way of looking at it. This was a meta-analysis where people looked at all of the literature and they plotted out every study and estimated what the relative risk was of dying of different disorders if you're physically active. So plotted on the bottom here, this is an increase in the number of hours of physical activity. And if we take the average person's relative risk of death as 1, and we see how much does physical activity lower the risk of mortality here in black and various diseases in color. And you can see that you can lower your risk of death with 6 hours or more of physical activity by almost 40%. The important point here is you don't need to go crazy and do an hour a day and get up to this level. You can see how the curve flattens out. So you can see that even an hour and a half to 2 hours of average physical activity across an entire week really significantly lowers your risk of all-cause mortality and a variety of other common disorders. So although many of you have genetic mitochondrial disease, many of you who have the adult form will not die of mitochondrial disease. You'll die of the common things, heart disease, cancer. And so we have to think about these things because these are really the main causes of death in adult mitochondrial disease. That is the common things which affect most individuals. I also wanted to point out the reason why being inactive is important. Now, this is a bit of an extreme example, but it's true even with minor inactivity. So in this study, we had young, healthy university students, and we put a leg immobilizing brace on their knee, and we gave them crutches and said, you can't put any weight through that leg for 2 weeks. We did muscle biopsies before, 2 days into it, and 14 days after. And we did all sorts of things to look at their muscle strength and function. We had an equal number of men and women in this study. And then we did this thing called a gene array chip. So we looked at 14,500 different genes and how they were expressed. We had 72 different time points across these individuals. And the number one thing that changed was the mitochondria. So the electron transport chain and another thing called the Krebs cycle, they went down dramatically. And what was interesting is that after 2 days, all of the genes went down, in some cases by a substantial amount. Up to 70% of the master regulator for making new mitochondria, called PGC1 alpha, went down. And what was interesting is that by only 2 weeks, we lost about 30% of the total mitochondria in that muscle. So you can imagine if people are in a wheelchair or they're inactive for a very long period of time, it further exacerbates the mitochondrial dysfunction. Again, further reasons to try and move at all costs. So we've done some work with my good friend and colleague, Dr. Bob Navio, and this shows that across an entire life, how does exercise impact the mitochondria? So we took a different approach. In the study I just talked about, we looked at proteins and we looked at genes. Here we looked at the metabolites. So most of you are probably familiar with lactate, which is the main metabolite, which indicates mitochondrial dysfunction. But there are thousands of metabolites in the human body, and they can reflect what pathways are being affected. So we wanted to look at young individuals who are sedentary or athletic and compare them to older adults who are sedentary or who had been pretty much their whole life athletic. But for those of you who have not been athletic your whole life, we also looked at the same group of older individuals who are sedentary, and we did 3 months of endurance exercise training to see, can we reverse some of what's going on? So what we found is aging itself, the number one gene pathway, the metabolite pathway that went down was mitochondria. So there was a very significant impact of aging on the mitochondria. So in the way in which immobilization lowers mitochondrial function, so too does human aging. So it's important to stay active throughout your whole life. And I won't go through any of these other points here. The main point is mitochondria were number one. What's interesting is this is a way that we can look at how all of the genes are expressed. And what it shows here is that if you look at older adults who are sedentary versus those who are athletic, there was a shift of all of the metabolites towards better mitochondrial function, lower oxidative stress, almost to that of young individuals. What was interesting is that after even 3 months of training, a lot of those genes started to move over. They started to shift towards a more favorable profile. So it's never too late to start exercise. That's always a point I like to make. So with mitochondrial disease, with primary mitochondrial disease, where can the problem arise with respect to exercise capacity? Well, if we look at how blood and oxygen gets to our muscle, it has to go in through our lungs. It's pumped out from the heart through the blood vessels to the muscles. When it gets to the muscles, it gets offloaded, and the ultimate acceptor of the oxygen we breathe is the mitochondria in complex 4 in the respiratory chain. So anywhere along this pathway, people can have exercise intolerance. And depending on the mitochondrial disease that you have, any or all of these systems can be affected. Certainly in children, especially with more severe forms, the heart can be affected. As we get older, sometimes there can be cardiac dysfunction, so you don't pump out as much nutrients and blood to the mitochondria. But with most patients, it's a problem unloading or getting that oxygen and the food into the mitochondria to make energy. And what does that do? Well, in some patients, they get cramps when they exercise. They can get muscle discomfort during exercise, which can persist afterwards. If you exercise too hard, you can get something called rhabdomyolysis, where you break down muscle. And some of our MELAS patients, before they got the diagnosis, would tell me that if they went to help a friend on the weekend, one guy in particular was laying bricks and ended up with a very significant breakdown of muscle and black urine. Some of our patients get fixed weakness. Certainly female smokers with CPEO have more fixed weakness, and a number of our MELAS patients get fixed weakness. The other thing that we see in many patients is exercise intolerance. So some are just weak, some have exercise intolerance, some have both. But exercise intolerance is pretty common. And that is, you're fine sitting around, everything's great because the mitochondria aren't working. There's no need for them to be in trouble because they're not doing anything. But when you push yourself, that's when you feel the symptoms. And a lot of our patients have a very low oxygen carrying capacity because the mitochondria just aren't accepting that oxygen. And that leads to things like shortness of breath and muscle fatigue. So what can you do about it? Well, we certainly know that with endurance exercise, you can increase the amount of mitochondria. And we know that from our young people where we do muscle biopsies and all sorts of fancy gene expression. And I'll show you that those same processes occur in patients with mitochondrial disease. So we know with mitochondrial disease that the VO2 max, or your maximal oxygen consumption, is often very low. In fact, in one of our studies with MELAS syndrome, about half of our patients had a VO2 max that was so low, it was below the limit where people predicted you needed your VO2 to be to maintain independent living. And as I pointed out, it's a vicious cycle. If you don't move, you get deconditioned. If you get deconditioned, your mitochondria don't work as well, and it can become a vicious cycle. Okay, and that's what we pointed out earlier. We know that exercise can increase the enzyme capacity in healthy people and the VO2. And there was a concern early on, though, and I'll talk about this, that if people exercise, they might do more harm than good. And that was in diseases like MELAS syndrome and MRF, there can be a varying amount of mutant and wild type mitochondria. And an early concern was that when you exercise, maybe the bad mitochondria would grow and not the good ones. That's not been shown to be the case. Multiple studies have shown that we increase the overall mitochondrial capacity, and there's no selective increase in the bad mitochondria. In fact, to some extent, we tend to weed out the bad mitochondria. So this is a study by, a group in, they had 20 patients with mitochondrial disease, 14 had point mutations like MRF and MELAS, and the other ones had deletions. And this was compared to healthy controls. So they did the same type of exercise training, 12 weeks on a cycloergometer at 70% of their maximal capacity. So you go on a bike, see how hard you can go, ramp it down by 30%, and try and get up to a half an hour 4 times per week. What they found is that the mitochondrial enzymes in both patients and controls went up by 2/3, and the VO2 max went up by 2/3. And this is important because your VO2 max is a predictor of mortality and your ability to function independently. And what was important is that there was no evidence of damage in the muscle. This was replicated by another very good friend of mine and colleague, Tanya Tavasalo. And these were in patients with chronic progressive external ophthalmoplegia. They did a similar training protocol, and then they detrained them. I won't go through all of it, but what was different about her study is not only did the muscle enzymes go up, the O2 extraction went up so they could extract more oxygen, and the quality of life got better. So, we can hand wave about all these fancy measurements, but do people feel better? And in fact, the quality of life did improve. The other important point to get across is when they stopped, everything went back to baseline within about 3 months. So what other types of exercise are there? Well, the opposite is weight training to induce hypertrophy or bigger muscles with more strength. So we did a study in older adults, and I've told you that older adults have small muscles, more mitochondrial dysfunction, and we used them as a guinea pig to see if we could reverse that mitochondrial dysfunction. So we had healthy 70-year-olds, men and women. We did 6 months of weight training twice per week, and they didn't look like this. They did standard weight training that you would be doing at a YMCA or any regular gym, starting off at half of their maximal capacity and gradually working up so that they did what are called 3 sets of 10 repetitions. Very standard protocol. And what we did again is we did this fancy gene array. And like I showed you with immobilization, where mitochondria go down, here, the mitochondria that were going down with aging went up big time after the 6 months of training, only training twice per week. And so what we saw is before exercise, the older adults had more mitochondrial dysfunction and more inflammation. After training, what we saw was a reversal, so that the inflammation went down and mitochondria got better. But does that hold true for mitochondrial patients? So chronic progressive external ophthalmoplegia, these patients get deletions of the mitochondrial DNA, just like human aging. This was Tanya again, my colleague, who did this study where they did 3 sets at 80%, which is a pretty intense type of weight training, 12 weeks. So again, they're exercising for 3 months. And what they found was an improvement in strength in both a knee kicking and a leg press type of activity. Importantly, there was no evidence of damage with the muscle enzymes. So with mitochondrial dysfunction, I'm just briefly going to talk about our mitochondrial cocktail because we've done a lot of work in this area. We know when mitochondria don't work properly, they produce more free radicals. So most of the cocktails that have been devised are looking at antioxidants. Other people have been looking at trying to bypass enzyme defects. So things like coenzyme Q10 can bypass people who have a defect at complex 1, and they can also be antioxidants. We've also looked at creatine, which is a bypass strategy, which I'll talk about. All of our strategies are trying to improve the production of ATP in the mitochondria. So bypassing the defect, if you have a complex 1 defect, CoQ10, succinate, or riboflavin. Lowering lactate's been tried, and dichloroacetate looked like it was going to do something, but clinically it didn't prove to be effective and cause neuropathy. So that's kind of out the window now. Antioxidants, we use lipoic acid and vitamin E because it's important to pair your antioxidants. Otherwise, they can become a pro-oxidant. We've also used things like creatine to provide an alternative energy source. Creatine doesn't require oxygen, so the levels are very low in mitochondrial patients, and we're trying to reverse that and give them more energy outside of the mitochondria. And exercise is what we're talking about. In MELAS syndrome, there's a spasm of the vessels, and we usually give people arginine to try and relax those vessels, especially during an acute stroke. An important thing that we've been promoting for years is check for deficiencies. You know, it's low-hanging fruit that if someone has severe vitamin D deficiency, vitamin B12 deficiency, those can cause very significant neurologic features, which can look just like mitochondrial disease in a healthy person, much less acquiring a disorder like this on top of your mitochondrial disease. So we always check for these and we replace them if they're deficient. The first study that we did was back before the year 2000. Some of you may not have even been born then. And we did a randomized clinical trial looking at creatine, and over a 1-minute period of repetitive exercise in a double-blinded fashion. So we didn't know, and they didn't know when they were on it. We showed about an 11% improvement in strength over time. Now, some of you might say, well, who cares about 11%? But when you're doing repetitive activities, it gives you more power. And when we look at things like Duchenne dystrophy, 6% increase in strength over a long period of time keeps kids out of a wheelchair by 2 years. We then did a randomized double-blind clinical trial back in 2007, where people were on a supplement or a placebo, and neither we nor them knew they were on it. That's what double-blind trial is. And so it was a crossover, so everyone got the placebo and the treatment. So we used coenzyme Q10, the hydrosoluble form. We used vitamin E, creatine monohydrate, and this comes out to about 1 heaping teaspoon of creatine a day, and alpha lipoic acid. What we found was an improvement in CoQ10, so it showed that they absorbed it, and we lowered markers of oxidative stress. So oxidative stress is one of the pathological hallmarks which causes damage to cells. So that went down. And we also looked at lactate, which is a marker of mitochondrial function. If it's up, that means your mitochondria don't work. And if they're working better, it'll go down, which is what we found on the treatment. And also another marker of oxidative stress went down. So that's the general cocktail that we use for our patients. And we've shown recently that when we exercise mice with various antioxidants that we use, it doesn't decrease the benefits of exercise. So I want to turn next to my friend and colleague, Erin Hatcher, who's been my research coordinator, and she also coordinates all of the exercise testing in our clinic. So I'm going to let her take it over, give you some practical examples, and then we'll take questions at the end. Okay, Erin, take over.
Hi, everybody. Looking to you guys about home have and hopefully answering some questions. So Mark, if you wouldn't mind, next slide, please. Perfect. So what we're going to talk about in my section of the talk this evening is what different types of exercise there are, how to exercise safely with mitochondrial disease, where to get started, some equipment that you might need, popular exercise terms and how to decode them. We're going to talk about resistance and endurance training programs, balancing exercises for those folks that have ataxia, breathing exercises, and some practical tips for staying on track with an exercise program. Next slide, please. Great. So we've already talked a bit about, with Dr. Tarnopolsky, why we exercise, and he's spoken very well about the benefits to our mitochondria. We know that we can strengthen our body, increase our stamina. A really important thing that we found with our patients is it helps to reduce fall risk for those patients that have balance problems. It helps to increase your energy. But really importantly, during these times is to help improve your mental state. We want everybody to maintain independence in their activities of daily living, and of course, to help maintain a healthy body weight, as Dr. Tarnopolsky mentioned, the COVID-19. So these are main reasons why we feel it's very important for our mitochondrial disease patients to stay active. Next slide, please. So we talked a bit about some different studies that we've done with our clinic involving resistance exercise. And most people just refer to resistance exercise as straight strength training or weightlifting. We're going to talk a little bit as well about endurance exercise. So that's exercise that'll help improve our heart and lung function. And it can also be cardio or aerobic exercise. Next slide, please. So exercising with mitochondrial disease obviously poses a lot of different challenges. We know that mitochondrial disease isn't just one thing or one challenge. So before we start any training programs, it's really important to identify which mitochondrial disease you have, to talk to your doctor about what your limitations are, and also to talk about any strategies you might need to do before you exercise, such as cardiovascular exercise, proper nutrition, making sure that you never exercise on an empty stomach, or to wait a few minutes before you exercise. Obviously, we never want to exercise if you have a fever or a flu, and that's incredibly important for mitochondrial disease patients. We talked a bit about muscle soreness, and we want to make sure that everybody knows that if your muscles are still sore from doing exercise from the previous few days, that you make sure you want to wait another day for sure before you start training. Making sure you're staying well hydrated during exercise, both before, during, and after, as well as monitoring yourself. So if you have the luxury of having a heart rate monitor, that's great. But really, it's important for our mito patients to listen to their bodies. We don't want to push ourselves too much. So you just really have to monitor yourself. A way that you can do that is also keeping a journal of your exercise, writing down after you complete a bout of exercise how you feel over the day or the next few days. And that will help you to formulate a plan. Next slide, please. So as I was just mentioning, noting signs of your personal fatigue. So what are triggers that you notice about yourself that'll help you to realize when you should slow down or to stop exercising? We don't want to exercise until we reach complete exhaustion. So finding that balance can be difficult for some. Making sure that you gradually increase over time is really important. So you're not going to start out with the heaviest weights or the longest workouts. Sometimes it starts with just small bouts. We also want to avoid exercising in extreme heat and cold, which can tax our mitochondria even more. We find that if patients are nervous about their safety when they're exercising, that having a buddy that they can exercise with not only helps increase compliance with our exercise programs, but it helps to increase safety as well. Wearing proper gear is important, having proper footwear, and also considering with mitochondrial disease, perhaps the afternoon you're feeling more energetic, or the morning or early in the evening. We want to optimize those times so you're getting the most out of your workouts. So making sure that you schedule your fitness in during those times is really important. Next slide, please. So this is a really common question that I see all the time in our clinic. Where do I get started? How do I get started? Well, as I mentioned before, it's really important to first check with your doctor, just to make sure that everything is health and safe for you, making sure that you're following the guidelines for your specific mitochondrial disease so that you can safely start exercising. A really good place to start is to make yourself a plan. Set a time of day, write down your goals, which, as I've mentioned, is so important. And start by focusing on the areas where you feel the most strength. That helps to build your confidence when you're moving forward in an exercise plan, and gather the equipment you need. Now, for some of us, that equipment can be delivered to your door if you're hesitant to go out with Amazon, or you can use things that you have around the home or your own body's weight. So there's lots of different strategies that you can do if you don't have equipment or you have very limited funds with which to buy equipment. Next slide, please. So where can we start with equipment? So as I was saying, you can use things around your home like water bottles or jugs of water, but really a set of free weights is a great place to start. TheraBands are great, which are those bendy elastic bands that you can get in varying different colors to represent different tensile strengths. Those can be purchased at Shoppers Drug Mart, by the yard, or you can pick them up at Canadian Tire or Walmart. Again, using your own body's resistance can be a strategy that you can use, like doing tricep dips on a chair or doing push-ups against the wall or the ground. Ankle or wrist weights are a great option if you have arthritis or weakness in your hands where you're worried about dropping something. A water bottle is really important. You want to make sure that, again, you're staying hydrated. And any of these things can be purchased through Amazon, Walmart. I've seen lots of equipment at Dollarama, Canadian Tire. And resistance equipment is one of the cheaper options for you. It can be free anywhere to sometimes up to $60 for some of these equipments. Next slide, please. Endurance exercise equipment can be a little bit more expensive. We're talking about treadmills, recumbent bikes, and upright bikes. Now, what's the difference between a recumbent bike and an upright bike? A recumbent bike, you're sitting in a chair and pedaling outward, whereas an upright bike, you're sitting more like on a bike you would ride outside. We find for people with balance issues, recumbent bikes are a great option. They allow you to sit comfortably without the risk of tottering on either side. On the screen there, you can see a small portable pedal ergometer. And those are great for those who are on a limited budget. They cost about $40 or $50. They can be put under your chair if you're working from home and doing a Zoom call. You could be working out at the same time. They can also move onto a desktop for you to pedal with your arms as well. So those are a great option for those of us who have more limited funds, but also want the portability of a cardiovascular equipment. Obviously, it's free to walk outside. It's about to get cold here, but walking outside is really a nice form of exercise. Again, factoring in the temperatures of being in extreme heat or cool. We want to make sure that you're always staying safe from that perspective, as well as thinking about walking on uneven surfaces or walking when there's ice or snow to make sure, if you're unsure, to bring a buddy or wait until a nicer day. We find a lot of our patients love swimming. We have to, again, keep in mind the water temperature. You don't want to be swimming in water that's too hot or too cold. Typically, the community pools keep their temperature at a good level. But again, a lot of these places are closed right now, so that's something to factor in. A lot of the equipment can be purchased at Kijiji or on Kijiji. A lot of people end up using their exercise equipment as clothing racks or end up collecting dust in a basement somewhere. These excellent pieces of equipment that people are anxious to get rid of. Canadian Tire. Fitness stores tend to be the most expensive, and so walking outside can be free. Treadmills can be anywhere up to a few $1,000s. Next slide, please. All right, as we move into more of the topic where I'm going to talk about some different exercises, I just want to explain what a repetition is and what a set is. So if we're talking about repetitions, then if I was doing a bicep curl, I would do 15 repetitions, I would rest and repeat that 3 times. Each repetition grouping would be called a set. And as we've talked about with Dr. Tarnopolsky, some of the previous studies that we've done, we really recommend 10 to 15 repetitions and 2 to 3 sets. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as we go on here. Next slide, please. So we really recommend doing a full body exercise 3 times a week. The full body exercises that we recommend take about 20 to 30 minutes. Now we're talking about 3 times a week with an adequate amount of rest in between each set. Now, sometimes for those of you that have a little bit more time, need more time to recover, those exercises can take a little bit longer, which is okay. We want to make sure that we're working within our personal capacities and whatever is safe for us. We like to start every workout with a light warm-up. We don't want to exhaust ourselves because we're about to do some endurance exercise using our muscles. So walking on the spot, doing some cycling, something to warm yourself up but not exhaust you. We like to focus on some major muscle groups in the upper and lower body. And we are going to start with just 1 set of everything. So we don't want to overwhelm ourselves right in the beginning when we're starting an exercise program by making our bodies too sore. We don't want to keep going. We want to start off with something that's light and easy so we can focus on our form and gradually add on as we go. Next slide, please. And a lot of people wonder, how much weight do I use? And that's a common question we get all the time. So we like to recommend the amount of weight that you can do 10 to 15 times. So let's say you have a 1 pound weight in either hand, you're doing some bicep curls, you can do it 10, 20, 30 times. That weight's too light for you. If you pick up something big and heavy and you can only get 4 or 5 contractions in, then that weight is too heavy. So you should be getting to about 10 or 15 till you start feeling that exhaustion setting in. So sometimes that does take a little bit of effort to tweak the amount of weights that you're using. I'm going to go back to saying again to keep a journal of the amount that you're using as a quick reference guide, so you're not reinventing it every time you go. You say, oh, last time this is what I did. Makes it easier for you to be consistent with your programs. So another question we get a lot is, should I do my exercises sitting or standing? And really the best answer is whatever is safest for you. So do you use a walker? Do you walk independently? Do you have balancing issues? Starting off sitting down is never a bad idea. The benefit to doing exercises when you're standing up is it helps you to work on your core muscle strength a little bit more than if you're sitting down. But however it's safest for you is really important when you're starting a program, and then you can work your way up to standing after. Next slide, please. So on your screen now, you're going to see a list of some of the exercises that we recommend for the lower body in our patients to be done while sitting down. You can see from the pictures here that the equipment that we need is really very minimal. In the first picture on the top left, you can see is a basic knee extension exercise. In the picture we have here is basic ankle weights. So you could do this exercise with an ankle weight. You could do this with a band tied on the back of the chair, or you could do it just with your own body's resistance. As we move down the list here, again, we're focusing on a lot of the muscles that we need to walk safely, to increase our mobility. And again, that does help us with reducing our fall risk, keeping our balance strong, and keeping our muscles able to do our activities of daily living. Any of the exercises you see here, if you'd like us to send you an email with these, we'd be happy to do so as well. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. On this page, you're going to see some of the upper body exercises. And again, you can see some free weights, some weighted balls here, and again, using your own body's resistance in our tricep dips. These exercises are again going to focus on healthy living, but also functional strength. So increasing the strength if you're lifting your kids or your grandkids, you're lifting up a box or any groceries. We want to work on things that you're going to feel a difference and will improve your daily living. Moving on from weight training, we're going to talk about endurance exercise. It's really important for our patients to start slow. And what I mean by that is if you're walking outside or you're walking on the treadmill, you want to make sure that you're not overdoing it in the beginning. If you're walking out a distance, to make sure that you're able to get back safely, for example. Making sure that you're always exercising with a mirror is also a nice tip as well. So you make sure if you have proper form, that you're sitting up tall, your shoulders are back, that you're not straining your muscles by using compensatory movements as you're exercising. When you're doing endurance exercise, it's really important to have proper footwear on. Why this is important is it helps reduce injury. It helps us to function properly without having too much shock on our bodies. And so basic running shoes are great, and making sure they're in good form and that your laces are tied tight. We don't want anybody tripping out there. I really like to have my cardio equipment by a TV. It helps to pass the time by watching something or distracting yourself, and scheduling your fitness where you can watch a certain program while you're doing it can help the time go by faster because it distracts you. Making sure that you're always watching for danger signs. So are you starting to feel lightheaded? Perhaps you didn't eat enough before. If you're having extreme shortness of breath, if you're having any chest pains, these are all danger signs that you need to stop, sit down, and make sure you rest. When you're having days like that, you don't want to continue exercising. Okay, next slide, please. So I spoke a little bit about ataxia and balancing exercises for improvement. Balancing exercises can be done every day. So the difference between when we're talking about endurance exercise and resistance exercise, where we don't want our muscles to be sore, balancing exercises are good to do every day. They help our vestibular system. They help work on the muscles of our ankles to keep them strengthened, and it's good for core strength as well. So your abdominal muscles and your lower back. With balancing exercises, it's really important to perform them in a place where you have something you can grab onto. So for example, beside a stair where you have a railing you could grab onto, or doing it next to a couch or chairs, something that you can balance on easily as you're working on increasing your balance. It's definitely important if you're a high-risk person to have a buddy by you if you can. Next slide, please. So here's a list of some of our balancing exercises that we give out in our clinic. So as you can see, we do have some chairs in the picture, something to hold on to. Some people need something a little bit more steady, so keep that in mind. Doing balancing exercises can be a great way, again, to reduce your risk of falling. We like to recommend that you time yourself if you can and write it down. Balancing is something that builds slowly over time. And so people can sometimes get a bit frustrated with the lack of progress here, but trust me, it's very worth it. Keeping a list of the amount of seconds it takes you to complete these tasks, or how long you can hold a balancing move for, can be really evident the data over the course of time as you're doing them. So again, activities that you're doing amount of time can help you to increase your. Next slide, please. Here are some additional balancing exercises as well. This is the second half of the sheet, and a little bit more difficult balancing is on this page. Now, Some of the exercises that you might find on these handouts are too difficult for you to perform, and that's okay. Focus on the ones you can do, and try not to get discouraged by the ones you can't. Ones that give you confidence, increasing your balance. Popular misconception when people exercise, that if they run up against something that's really difficult, they tend to shut down and not want to do it. So we want to, again, start with our strongest areas and focus on the things that give us confidence that we can do well, so you can build upon it and then challenge your body once you feel that confidence is there. Next slide, please. And again, if anybody does want copies of these exercises, you can reach out and we'd be happy to share our exercise programs with you. Now, I'm not a respirologist, so I'm not going to give too much detail on exercises for better breathing. It's really important to consult with your doctor or your respirologist if you're having issues with your breathing, to get a better guidelines for what's safe for you. What we recommend to some of our patients is what's called an incentive spirometer. And in the picture that you can see on the screen there, it looks like a graduated cylinder with a ball in it. And basically you're gonna breathe and push the air into the tube, making that ball rise. You can do different exercises where you try and hold it at certain levels to help control those muscles. These are great. They come in a variety of different sizes based on your ability level. And that's something that can be better recommended through your respirologist. Now, some of our patients also use cough assist machines if they have trouble clearing secretions in their lungs, especially during cold and flu season. And another device we use is breath stacking, which is what we do with our boys with muscular dystrophy mostly. But it involves using like a resuscitation bag to breathe in to help those respiratory muscles to stay safe and to keep some plasticity in the lungs. Next slide, please. So we spoke a bit about how to get started in exercising, and what's most important is how to keep on track with your exercising. It's really important, and it sounds silly to write down what your goals are, but having a list and having it be where your exercises are can be a really good motivation for you to keep on track. Maybe it's a picture of your kids. Maybe it's a picture of something that you want to treat yourself to if you reach your goal. Maybe it's improving your energy. Maybe it's being more active with your family. Having small, achievable goals will help you to stay on track. Some people like a reward system if they make a certain goal or stay on track with their exercising for a few weeks to reward yourself with something that you've been wanting or waiting to do. And it doesn't have to be something that you pay for. It can be something that is a treat for yourself. Using the buddy system is really important as well. If you can recruit a family member to exercise with you, the two of you can keep each other on track. I know, for example, when I was training for a half marathon, some mornings I wouldn't want to get out and train if it was freezing cold or there was ice on the ground. But I had a buddy that I was meeting and I felt like I needed to meet her. So having somebody else that you can train with is really important. It helps you keep on track. It helps you monitor your form while you're exercising. And it also gives you somebody to chat with while you're doing it. Scheduling your fitness. Now, again, this is even more important for our patients with mitochondrial disease. As I was mentioning, they might have certain times a day where they feel they have their optimal energy levels. So setting aside time for you in a time of day that's best, having your exercise equipment ready to go, having your exercise clothes out, helps to decrease those links. People are going to miss a day. It happens. We all miss a day. The most important thing that we can say is try and get back on track when you can. Don't beat yourself up if you have a couple of bad days, and don't let that be your excuse to not continue. If you miss a day, or if you miss a few, if you miss a week, that's okay. Don't beat yourself up, just start again. Finding activities that you enjoy doing. Maybe that's Zumba, maybe that's yoga, maybe that's Pilates, maybe it's walking outside. Having something that you look forward to doing is an activity you're going to stay the most compliant with. If you start an exercise program and you begrudge it and you're not looking forward to it every day, guess what? It's not going to be the most effective way for you to get healthy. Finding something that you enjoy doing is going to be the key to really locking in those results. And again, as I was mentioning, finding something that motivates you. Maybe you're frustrated with lack of energy. Maybe you wish you could keep up with family members. And having a gradual exercise program can help you to achieve those goals.
Maybe what we'll do is start taking some questions.
Sure, we can do that. And, you know, Doctor, one of the questions that came in, and it's a pretty important question. You know, mitochondrial disease patients get fatigued easily. So what type of activities would you recommend that they do so that in doing them, they don't wind up in bed for weeks on end because of the fatigue from the exercises?
I mean, I think Erin hit on the points.
Sorry.
If you can do 10 seconds, that's a good first step. We had a study that we just completed in myotonic muscular dystrophy patients. And these patients, when you looked at them, they were like walking skeletons. Their feet were dropping. They were skin and bones. One woman on the bike could barely go 30 seconds. By the end of it, by persistence and motivation and carefully going through it, you bump up that ceiling threshold where fatigue is. And at the end of it, she could do 3 workouts a week for 30 minutes. Her VO2 max, or fitness, went up 31%, and she put on 2 kilos of muscle. And if you saw, you know, 9 out of our 11 patients, you would say there's no way they can exercise. And the number one thing that we see in our myotonic patients is mitochondrial dysfunction, which is interesting. We're writing a paper on that. But my point is, with our patients, doesn't matter how severe you are, eventually you can push that threshold. So for some of us, let's say the threshold is at 10 units and you're severely impaired. So your activities of daily living is fatiguing for you. What you need to do is to find close to that level and gradually bump that ceiling up. Now, you're never going to be up at a world-class level, but if you can even improve by 15, 20, 30, 40%, it makes it so that your daily activities don't cross that threshold of extreme fatigue. So I think all of the tips that Erin mentioned, plus having the rest and recovery to allow the mitochondria to get ready for the next bout. The first thing we learn in biology and exercise physiology is that organisms are adaptive. And so when you stress the system, you'll build up pathways and systems that will resist that stress. So the next time it's not as debilitating.
Erin, I want to come to you because some of the questions that we
Fatigue
got.
syndrome and these sort of things.
Doctor, I think I'm sorry, you're cutting out. I want to ask Erin, exercises for patients that don't walk or who have mobility issues. And I know you went over some of those things in your presentation. Can you go back over that?
Absolutely. So if you're non-ambulatory, things that the arm ergometer are a great thing to have that helps you to work on your cardiovascular fitness when you can't recruit the muscles of your legs to do that. Again, working on exercises that are using your own body's resistance in your legs. So for example, trying to bend your knee out when you don't have the strength to do so. Even engaging those muscles and moving a tiny amount is really important. Working on exercises for your upper body to help transfers and moving from chair to bed can be life-changing. And we're not talking about, you know, drastically changing the ability to move your legs. We're talking about getting the blood flowing to your legs, trying to work on maintaining that strength. If we think about our mitochondrial disease patients or anybody in general over time, we expect as the course of our life occurs that our strength is going to go down. If we can keep that strength the same, we consider that a win as well. So working on small achievable goals and engaging the muscles as best we can in our lower body, tapping the toes, trying to march your legs. You might not be doing huge movements, but even engaging those muscles is really important because we don't want to lose anything further.
Well, that brings me to this point. If you're a parent or a caregiver, how do you know if you're pushing the patient too much?
Well, you have to watch for signs, and I think it depends on the child. Some of our kids that have mitochondrial disease can't vocalize themselves very well. And I think gradually doing these exercises really slowly, and it might not seem like you're doing much when you're doing things at a slower pace, but it is really important to really start slow and work your way up. Kids can show you signs, or they might give you feedback. It's hard because kids sometimes don't want to do these exercises. And so I think you have to base it on your own child and, use your instincts as a parent. You know your kids better than anybody. And so doing things that are in a gradual manner, watching your kids' signs, and keeping track of how they're doing over time is really important. You can also bring any of your journals or logs to your appointments with you to get some more feedback on some strategies.
Doctor, I know I'm gonna.
And if you're not sure where to,
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Erin.
And if you're not sure where to start with your child, asking for a referral to a physical therapist, or working with somebody in your home where they can come in and go over things with you, there's no harm in doing that. And that way it's tailor-made to your individual child. And unfortunately, I can't reach through the computer and see anybody's individual situation at home. But having somebody to come in can give you the confidence to keep going.
Doctor, I know I'm going to probably mispronounce this, but it's something that you talked about and came in on the chat. Rhabdomyolysis. If you've had that, can you get it again? That's the question.
Oh, yes. Rhabdomyolysis is when you break down your muscle. We see it in healthy people if they push too hard. So every human in the being in the world can get rhabdomyolysis. But some mitochondrial diseases will lower the threshold so that it's easier to get rhabdomyolysis with less activity. And what we do find is that if you've had it once, as long as you follow the guidelines, most people won't have it again. So we see about 100 patients a year who have rhabdomyolysis, and usually it's because they did something that wasn't very smart. They took 4 months off exercise, went back and tried to push at a level that they were at before after months and months of gradually training, or they went with a buddy who, had bodybuilder tattoos and those barbed wire tattoos you see, and they brought them to a gym and worked them out too hard. But if people follow the rules that Erin and I have developed over many, many years, you can prevent that from happening again. It's critical not to exercise if you have a cold or a flu or any other illness. You should be hydrated. You should have some food in your belly. So don't fast for 12 hours and then work out. All of those things can help to avoid rhabdomyolysis. And when people follow the guidelines, it's very rare to ever have it again.
One of the things you also talked about, and we're getting questions about, is there a certain metabolic panel that a patient should ask their doctor to have done in order to see where they may be deficient and how they may be able to add supplements?
Yeah, so the key things that we find that can have a severe impact on muscle or mitochondria are low iron, far more common in women. And in fact, a study in Canada in middle-aged women with generalized fatigue, I'm not talking about real mitochondrial fatigue, which is, exercise-induced, but generalized sleepy type of fatigue. Even in those individuals, when their iron levels were less than 50, that's the ferritin level, when it was replaced to above 50, the signs of that generalized fatigue went away. And why that's important is that our mitochondria work with iron sulfur clusters. And if our iron is low, even before we become anemic, our mitochondria start to suffer. So we always check ferritin. We check vitamin B12. 13% of our patients with mitochondrial disease have low B12. And the symptoms are dementia, peripheral neuropathy, ataxia, from B12 deficiency in an able-bodied person. Throw that on a susceptible mitochondria, not a good solution. Next, we also check folate in most patients as well, either red blood cell or total folate, and replace that. What else? Vitamin D. Vitamin D insufficiency, we see in 85% of patients in Canada, maybe a little less in parts of the States, but still very common. 13% are so deficient, they're in the rickets range. And at that level, we know that vitamin D is important in muscle function. And we've had patients come in wanting a workup for mitochondrial disease, and all they had was a profoundly low vitamin D level. So again, you don't want to throw gasoline on a fire that's burning. So to summarize, ferritin, CBC, which looks at your total red blood cell count, vitamin B12, vitamin D, folate, and if someone has ataxia, we always check vitamin E as well. In general, we recommend a balanced multivitamin. We recommend replacing any deficiencies that are identified. And then for people with mitochondrial disease, we go on our quadruple cocktail of creatine, alpha-lipoic acid, vitamin E, and coenzyme Q10, because it's been shown in a randomized double-blind trial to lower all the markers of oxidative stress and mitochondrial dysfunction.
So you mentioned creatine, and the question is, should it be taken before or after exercise?
Yeah, creatine has a very long half-life. What I mean by that is that once it's in the body, it stays there for a long time. It takes about a month to load the brain and nervous tissue with creatine, but it takes about a month for it to go away. Same thing is true of muscle. It takes about 3 to 4 days on high doses, which I hasten to add, we don't recommend. We generally recommend 1 heaping teaspoon for adults, which is just over 5 grams, which is only about 3 times what you get in a meat-eating diet. And that, after about 30 days, will load your muscle. So it doesn't work immediately. So it really doesn't matter then when you take it, as long as it's on a consistent basis, because it slowly comes in. And if you stop, it takes weeks to months for it to go away. But timing is not important. On the other hand, timing of your nutrition is a little bit more important. As Aaron pointed out, having some food in your belly, not a lot, but don't be totally fasted. Sometimes a little bit of carbohydrate right before exercise can help to give some fuel. If you're going for more than an hour, which most people with mitochondrial disease will not, but we've had a few who could work up to that level, then having a little bit of carbohydrate during will help. And when you finish, ideally, if you have some good quality protein, eggs, milk-based products, cheese, fish, these sort of things, within a half an hour or so, it tends to incorporate more into your muscle. And that's a little more important for those who have fixed weakness. So our muscular dystrophy patients, or some of our mitochondrial patients that have more of a fixed muscle weakness, more like a muscular dystrophy pattern.
Would you recommend any kind of niacin supplements?
There's a lot of interest in niacin and the niacin riboside. We haven't studied it. There's some evidence that it may be of some benefit. I think with niacin, you have to be careful that you can flush. So some people get a significant redness and they feel really hot. So if you want to try it, start low, like 250 milligrams twice a day, and increase gradually to 1 gram total daily dose. But listen to your body, make sure you're not flushing. They used it for high triglyceride, and people usually couldn't take it, start to flush too much.
We have a question. A parent wants to know that their son is going through puberty. Should he exercise more or less or differently?
Well, I think during puberty, most boys tend to want to exercise more because they see their body growing. They become attracted to women and they want to look buff. So it is a time when we do see a lot of, boys transitioning to men want to exercise. So it's a time to capture that and use it in a positive way to encourage them to exercise. Because what we find often is when your friends are around and there's opportunities, a lot of teenagers will do activity. But when they get into their 20s and you start to work or get married, people stop doing it. So it's a time to encourage children to figure out what works for them, what they enjoy. I call it a smorgasbord of activity for children and young adults, to show them all the different things that are out there and encourage safe, fun activity. Because the more—
And if I can—
Yeah, go ahead.
If I can add into that too, it's really important as parents for us to model that behavior to our children. A lot of times there's a misconception where parents think if they exercise their kids, they're going to stunt their growth. And that's just not true. Encouraging them to be active and modeling that behavior yourself is really important for them to develop a lifelong pattern of healthiness, especially with mitochondrial disease. It's not something that you're just going to do for a few years and stop. It's something that we want you to continue on through your lifespan.
So, Aaron, staying with you, one of our patient families asked a question. 12-year-old son's nonverbal, has significant intellectual disability, loves swimming, but obviously can't do that right now. What would you suggest?
So, is the child ambulatory?
No, it uses a wheelchair for mobility.
Okay. So swimming is a great activity. It feels great because you can unweight the body. Things that you could do at home might be exercises like on a mat, getting some music involved, having things that they can reach for and grab, developing a pattern where they get into a routine with maybe trying some yoga moves or some dance moves, things that don't feel like exercise that are more fun for them to do. Unfortunately, we've seen this so frequently with COVID-19, a lot of the swimming pools are closed. There's not really much that's comparable on land to the freedom that a lot of these kids and adults get when they're swimming. A lot of the benefit comes as well for the joints as well. So I think without knowing the child, I would say try and do some activities on a mat, have play or music involved in it as well, and try and find something that motivates your child. It's hard to know without seeing them, and I wish you the best of luck.
So I know we're slightly over on our time, and I have two more questions I want to ask each of you, one of them. Aaron, staying with you for this question. It was submitted during the webcast here. A patient with CPEO wants to know, is it worth it to do eye movement exercises, and does that really help?
We haven't found that, and potentially Dr. Tarnopolsky can weigh in on this as well, but we haven't necessarily found that it's very helpful in terms of eye exercises, but we haven't studied it ourselves. I haven't seen any research articles on the subject, so maybe Dr. Tarnopolsky can weigh in on that.
It's an excellent question. What we generally do is the biggest problem with CPO is convergence insufficiency. So if my fingers are your eyes, what happens is normally when we try to read, our eyes go in a little bit. So take your finger and bring it in and try and follow the finger and your eyes will come in. You need to converge in order to see up close. And so with our CPO patients, that's the biggest problem they have, because eventually the eyes stay fixed in the middle and can't converge. So one of the things that we do to help some of them early on, eventually the eyes are going to be stuck and then you have to hold the book further away and use other strategies. But early on, what you can do is take a pencil, hold it out at arm's length, look at it, and try to follow the pencil as you bring it in. And hopefully you can start working on that convergence so you can get a little bit of convergence, because the biggest problem a lot of our patients have is when they try to read, it gets blurred and they get very fatigued. So I would certainly try doing those exercises. There's no clinical trial that's shown that it works, but some of our patients do report that it's easier to read for a longer period of time if they do that.
And also, doctor, and this question I think it's a good question. What's the difference between exercise intolerance and just being plain old out of shape?
Yeah, it's a great, excellent question, almost philosophical
question.
Because certainly any human being who sits around and doesn't do anything will develop exercise intolerance, and that inactivity is causing secondary mitochondrial dysfunction. So, clearly the human body moves, and there's even evolutionary theory that we evolved as a human species, as Homo sapiens, through our ability to do endurance exercise. And it's a great read in the Nature magazine that 170,000 years ago, endurance exercise was part of who we are. So certainly getting away from activity, which society is kind of pushing us in that direction, is leading to obesity, type 2 diabetes, and secondary mitochondrial dysfunction. So I think at the end of it, and I think Aaron, is trying to emphasize this as well, there's so many things to do out there. You got to find what turns you on and makes you interested. A half an hour a day of some activity, I don't care what it is so much better than just sitting around and not doing anything. And for a lot of us too, there's probably genes for crazy people like me that have run 100,000 kilometers in the last 30 years that make us want to exercise, and other people don't want to do it. But when you've got mitochondrial disease, that's that extra incentive that you know it's going to be beneficial for you. But there is that feeling where, oh my God, I hate this, I don't like it. But as Aaron pointed out, it takes weeks to develop a new habit. Change where your peanut butter is in the cupboard. You'll go back to the original cupboard for almost a year. It's no different than exercising.
So Aaron, everybody is asking for your slides and your papers on exercising. So I know you will send those to us, and we will.
Absolutely.
I know that we will send a follow-up email to everybody that registered for this this webcast. So we will have that for you, or at least tell you where you can download those. So really, both of you, thank you so much for your time today and being on Ask the Mito Doc. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us, and thanks so much, Aaron. Great job as always.
And we also want to thank our patient families for submitting some fantastic questions. If we didn't get to your question, don't worry. We will get them answered, and they will be posted, so you will be able to get an answer, because that's why we're here. Thanks to my colleagues, Kara Strittmatter and Margaret Moore, who many of you know are in the background making sure these webcasts are running perfectly, and they do a great job. So thank you all for being with us. We hope to see you next month, December the 8th, with Dr. Marriage on Ask the Mito Doc.
Thank you. Good night.